Today, we're diving deep into a story that has been making waves across Europe, a decision by Denmark that has left many European leaders more than just uncomfortable. It's a story tied to politics, migration, national security, and the growing tension between national policies and collective European expectations. The decision itself is being described by analysts as bold, controversial, and potentially a turning point for how European nations respond to pressures inside their borders. In this video, we're going to break it all down in simple and clear terms, so stay with me till the end. Denmark isn't usually the country making explosive headlines. Known for its calm politics, stable governance, and strong welfare systems, Denmark often appears as one of the most peaceful countries on the European map. But this time, it surprised everyone with a move that some leaders are calling a dangerous precedent, while others see it as a long overdue wake-up call. To understand why Europe is worried, we first need to look at what pushed Denmark to make this decision and why it believes the current European system is no longer workable. For several years, Denmark has been tightening policies around immigration, welfare dependence, and integration. This wasn't sudden. Danish governments, both left and right, have slowly shifted towards more restrictive policies because they argue the system was becoming unsustainable. Denmark's political leaders claim that high migration levels were putting pressure on schools, housing, welfare funds, and local communities. Even though Denmark is a small country with only around 6 million people, it has taken a proportionally high number of asylum seekers compared to many larger European nations. The tipping point came when Danish authorities argued that the European Union was not responding effectively to rising migration numbers. They said burden-sharing rules weren't being followed equally, and some countries were taking advantage of the system while others were carrying a heavier load. Denmark felt that its national interests were being overshadowed by broader European expectations, and that's where the decision at the center of this controversy comes in. The Danish government announced that it would take measures independent of EU migration arrangements, giving itself the full authority to process asylum applications outside Denmark and even outside Europe. This means asylum seekers might no longer enter Denmark physically to apply for protection. Instead, they could be sent to a partner country, often in Africa, for processing. If approved, Denmark might resettle them, but if rejected, they would remain in those external facilities. European leaders immediately criticized this move, saying it undermines the unity of the EU. They argue that if more countries follow Denmark's example, the collective asylum system could collapse. Denmark's decision also touches on another sensitive issue: the future of the Schengen system and free movement policies. Critics worry that if countries start bypassing common rules and setting their own independent frameworks, Europe may slowly shift away from unified border and migration strategies. Some leaders warn that this could increase inequality between countries and encourage others to adopt harsher or more selective policies. But from Denmark's point of view, the decision isn't about breaking unity. They argue it's about protecting domestic stability and ensuring fairness. Danish officials insist that uncontrolled migration hurts both their welfare system and the long-term chances of successful integration. They claim that processing asylum applications abroad will discourage dangerous journeys, reduce smuggling networks, and focus resources on genuine refugees instead of economic migrants. According to Danish leaders, this decision is actually a humanitarian step, not a harsh one. Still, across the continent, many leaders worry that Denmark's approach blurs the lines between human rights obligations and political convenience. Human rights groups argue that sending people to third-country processing centers increases the risk of abuse, poor living conditions, and reduced legal protection. They fear that outsourcing asylum responsibilities could become the new European trend if Denmark's idea spreads. Nations under internal political pressure might copy Denmark, especially with rising nationalist and anti-immigration movements in several regions. Some analysts say that Denmark is responding not just to migration pressures, but also to growing voter frustration at home. In recent years, European politics has shifted dramatically, with many citizens feeling insecure about jobs, cultural identity, and rapid demographic changes. Denmark's political parties have responded by trying to show they're in control, especially during elections. This is another reason European leaders are nervous. The decision reflects powerful political pressure that exists far beyond Denmark's borders. Let's look deeper into what makes Denmark's move so concerning for the rest of Europe. The EU operates on shared agreements. Countries follow common procedures, common border rules, and common asylum criteria. This is meant to prevent chaos and ensure fairness. But if Denmark effectively steps outside of certain elements of these rules, it opens the door for other members to do the same whenever it suits them politically. Critics say this could weaken the EU from the inside, slowly creating a patchwork of conflicting systems instead of a unified region. Another factor is the fear of diplomatic tensions with countries outside Europe. If Denmark plans to send asylum seekers to partner nations for processing, those countries need to agree. Such agreements often involve financial incentives or political concessions, which can create power imbalances. Some African nations have already expressed concerns that Europe is trying to shift its responsibilities onto poorer countries. This could damage Europe's global reputation and its long-term diplomatic relationships. On the other side, there is a section of the European population that supports Denmark's decision. They believe European governments have failed to find a workable solution for migration and national security. They argue that if the EU can't protect borders effectively, countries have the right to take matters into their own hands. This group sees Denmark as bold rather than problematic. For them, Denmark is doing what many governments are too afraid to do: challenge outdated systems and prioritize their own citizens. One of the biggest questions now is whether Denmark's decision will actually work in practice. For years, Europe has debated external asylum processing, but very few countries have implemented it successfully. There are legal barriers, humanitarian concerns, and operational challenges. If Denmark can't manage these issues smoothly, the plan might backfire, causing more chaos and criticism. But if Denmark succeeds, it may inspire a wave of similar policies across Europe. This situation also highlights the growing divide between different European countries. Southern nations like Italy and Greece face heavy arrivals from the Mediterranean and want more help from the EU. Eastern countries are already resistant to taking migrants and prefer strict border controls. Northern countries like Sweden and Germany have struggled with integration and social tensions. In this complex landscape, Denmark's decision adds another layer of pressure to an already strained system. Another issue worrying European leaders is how this decision might influence political parties across the continent. Populist and nationalist parties have been gaining strength in recent years. Denmark's move could become a powerful talking point for them, proving that stricter policies are possible. They may use Denmark as an example during elections, pushing for similar approaches in their own countries. This shift could reshape Europe's political map for years to come. The debate around Denmark's decision is not purely political. It also touches on deeper moral and humanitarian questions. What responsibility do wealthy nations have towards people fleeing war or poverty? How much control should a country have over who enters its borders? Should governments prioritize national interests over international commitments? There are no simple answers to these questions, and Denmark's decision forces Europe to confront them again. Some experts warn that if Europe fails to address these issues collectively, the continent may face more instability and division. Migration is unlikely to slow down in the coming decades due to global conflicts, climate change, and economic inequality. Without a coordinated strategy, Individual decisions like Denmark's might lead to long-term fragmentation of European unity. Still, Denmark remains firm in its position. The Danish government insists that this decision is necessary for long-term stability. They argue that ignoring the problem or relying on outdated EU systems is no longer an option. Danish leaders say they are prepared for political criticism, but believe the benefits outweigh the risks. In their view, the decision will protect Denmark's welfare system, strengthen border security, and reduce illegal migration routes. What's also interesting is how Denmark's own population reacts to these policies. Opinion polls show that a surprisingly large share of Danes support stricter migration controls. For many, this is not just a political debate. It's about everyday life, community balance, and social cohesion. Danish politicians know this, and they reflect this sentiment in their decision-making. This strong domestic support is another reason European leaders are worried. It suggests the political mood across Europe might be shifting faster than Brussels can handle. In the coming months, all eyes will be on Denmark to see how this decision unfolds. Will it create diplomatic tensions within the EU? Will other countries follow? Will the system even function the way Denmark plans? These are the questions leaders in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, and across the continent are asking. And these questions are exactly why Europe is watching Denmark so closely. Another angle to consider is the economic impact of the decision. Supporters argue that reducing uncontrolled migration will ease pressure on housing, welfare benefits, and job markets. They believe taxpayers will benefit, and public resources will be used more efficiently. Critics, however, argue that restricting migration may harm the workforce, especially in sectors that rely on foreign labor. They warn this could create labor shortages and higher costs in the long term. Denmark must balance these two realities carefully. The decision also reflects a broader trend in Europe, the rise of identity politics. Many people across the continent feel like their cultural identity is changing rapidly due to globalization and migration. Politicians respond to this by promising stronger borders, more control, and tighter immigration rules. Denmark's move is part of this larger shift, and European leaders fear it may accelerate even further after this example. There's also the legal side of the story. Denmark's decision may face challenges in European courts. Some legal experts believe outsourcing asylum processing may conflict with EU treaties or international refugee laws. If the decision ends up in court, it could spark a major legal battle with implications for the entire continent. This uncertainty adds even more tension to the situation. If Denmark succeeds in implementing its plans smoothly, it could rewrite the rulebook for migration in Europe. But if it fails or faces legal setbacks, it could weaken the Danish government's credibility and create friction inside the EU. That is why this decision is so high stakes. It is not just about Denmark, it is about the future of Europe's migration framework. Political analysts also point out that Denmark's decision shows how much Europe has changed in the last decade. In the past, such a move would have been unthinkable. But now, with rising political pressure, shifting public opinion, and strained EU unity, more countries are willing to challenge old rules. Denmark is simply the first to take a major step in a direction others have only discussed behind closed doors. Europe's reaction to Denmark varies from sharp criticism to cautious respect. Some leaders say Denmark is being irresponsible. Others admit privately that Denmark is addressing issues they themselves struggle with but cannot publicly confront. This mixed reaction shows how complicated the political environment in Europe has become. As we move forward, the big question remains: will Denmark's decision bring stability or chaos? Will it encourage reform within the EU or create further division? No one knows for sure, but one thing is clear. Denmark has forced Europe to have a difficult conversation about migration, borders, and responsibility. and this conversation will shape the future of the continent. The world is watching closely, and so are we. Denmark's decision marks a critical moment in European politics, possibly the start of a new era where national governments take stronger control over migration policies. Whether this strengthens or weakens Europe will depend on how leaders respond, whether they seek new collective solutions or move towards more independent and fragmented approaches. As discussions continue in parliaments across Europe, the political tension will likely rise. Critics will argue that Denmark is undermining European unity, while supporters will say Denmark is protecting its national interests. This clash of perspectives reflects the larger struggle taking place across the entire continent. In the end, Denmark's decision forces all European countries to confront one fundamental question: how should Europe handle migration in a way that is fair, effective, and sustainable? The answer will shape not only political policies, but also social harmony, economic stability, and Europe's identity in the world. Thank you for watching, and if you found this explanation helpful, make sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more detailed breakdowns of major global stories. Stay tuned, because we'll continue following this situation closely and bring you updates as it evolves.